It was supposed to be just another ordinary morning at Willow Creek Elementary, the kind of day where nothing remarkable happens. Parents kissed their kids goodbye at the drop-off lane, teachers clutched travel mugs of coffee, and the faint sound of sneakers squeaking echoed through the freshly waxed hallways. Nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. But Shadow, the black-and-tan German shepherd who never wagged his tail without reason, froze in place at the far end of the corridor. His amber eyes locked on a bright rainbow-colored poster taped neatly above the drinking fountain. His lips curled, the low rumble of a growl vibrating through the tiled hall. The teacher escorting her second graders stopped mid-sentence. Officer Harris," she said nervously, glancing at the dog. "What's wrong with him?" Officer Daniel Harris, the school resource officer who'd been patrolling these halls for nearly a decade, felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Shadow didn't growl for no reason. Not ever. That was the moment everything shifted. A routine school day would unravel into something no one at Willow Creek could have imagined. A hidden crime, a missing child, and a canine dog who saw what humans overlooked. Daniel tugged lightly at the leash. "Easy, boy," he whispered. But Shadow didn't move. The dog's stance was rigid, nose pointed at the poster like it was alive. It was one of those cheesy motivational prints the PDA loved. Block letters spelling, "Be kind, be brave, be you," with cartoon kids holding hands under a sun. Nothing about it screamed trouble. Still, Shadow wouldn't stop growling, his claws scraping faintly against the tile. "Looks like he doesn't appreciate art," the teacher joked, forcing a laugh. The kids giggled, but Daniel didn't. He knew better. Shadow's instincts had saved lives before. "Go on," he told the kids gently. "Get to class." Once they were gone, Daniel crouched, running his hand along the base of the wall beneath the poster. Nothing obvious, just smooth, freshly painted drywall. He tapped it lightly with his knuckles. Hollow. But this was an old school. Half the walls sounded hollow. Still, Shadow kept pawing at the baseboard, whining softly now. His body was tense, ears pricked forward. Daniel frowned, making a mental note. He'd circle back later, maybe with maintenance. Right now, he had to keep moving. The rest of the morning looked normal. A spilled milk carton in the cafeteria. A student in the nurse's office with a stomachache. The smell of crayons and pizza drifting down the hall. But Daniel couldn't shake the image of Shadow, stiff as a statue, glaring at that poster. By late morning, he had almost convinced himself it was nothing. Dogs reacted to strange scents all the time, cleaning products, rodents, even food tucked away in lockers. He leaned against the counter in the teacher's lounge, sipping burnt coffee, and tried to laugh it off. That was when his radio crackled. "Officer Harris, can you come to the cafeteria? We've got a situation." He set down the coffee immediately. Shadow, resting at his feet, perked up and trotted beside him down the hall. In the cafeteria, a cafeteria worker wrung her hands. "It's probably nothing," she said. But one of the lunchboxes went missing. A pink one with unicorns. "Belongs to little Emily Carter. She swears she left it right here on the bench." Daniel raised an eyebrow. A missing lunchbox wasn't exactly a crisis. But then Shadow lunged forward, nose down, sniffing furiously along the cafeteria floor. He circled the benches, then stopped at the double doors that led to the maintenance hallway. His bark exploded, sharp and insistent. The noise cut through the chatter of kids eating pizza slices and slurping juice boxes. Heads turned. Forks paused mid-air. "Shadow, heel," Daniel called, but the dog barked louder, straining at the leash toward the maintenance doors. The cafeteria grew quiet. By the time recess rolled around, the missing lunchbox was forgotten. Kids flooded the playground, chasing each other across monkey bars and blacktop. Teachers kept watch from benches, chatting about weekend plans. Daniel stood near the fence, scanning the area as he always did. Shadow sat at his side, ears twitching at every sound. It wasn't until recess ended and students lined up to head back inside that the real alarm came. "Where's Emily?" a teacher called out, her voice tight. She counted heads again. "Emily Carter isn't here." The line of first graders shifted nervously. A few pointed toward the swings, others shrugged. But Emily's small figure, strawberry blonde hair, pink sneakers, was nowhere to be seen. Daniel's chest tightened. A 6-year-old missing on a school playground was no small matter. "Check the bathrooms," he ordered quickly. "Check the nurse's office." Teachers scattered. Parents were called. The principal rushed outside, her face pale. But Shadow didn't wait. The German shepherd surged forward, nose low to the ground, pulling Daniel hard toward the side of the building. His leash strained so tight Daniel nearly lost grip. "Where are you taking me, boy?" Daniel muttered, stumbling to keep up. Shadow darted past the playground, past the basketball hoops, straight toward the back service doors that led into the maintenance hall. He barked furiously, claws scraping against the metal door. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of bleach and dust. Exposed pipes rattled overhead, the hum of the boiler vibrating through the walls. Custodians stored supplies here, but students almost never wandered back. Shadow pulled Daniel down the narrow corridor, past mop buckets and stacked boxes of paper towels. He stopped suddenly in front of the same wall from earlier that morning, the one with the rainbow-colored poster. The poster was gone now. Only tape marks remained. Daniel's stomach dropped. Shadow whined, pawing desperately at the baseboard, barking so hard his voice cracked. His tail was rigid, fur bristling. Daniel pressed his palm against the wall again. Still hollow. But this time, he noticed faint scuff marks at the bottom, like something heavy had been dragged. His radio buzzed in his ear. "Officer Harris, we've checked the bathrooms, the nurse's office, every classroom. Emily's not there." The words echoed through him like ice. He looked down at Shadow. The dog's nose was pressed to the seam of the wall, growling low, body trembling with focus. Daniel took a deep breath. "All right, boy. Let's find her." That nightmarish realization, that a child had vanished inside the walls of her own school, wouldn't fully hit until later. For now, the search had only begun. But if anyone could see what the rest of them couldn't, it was Shadow. The principal's voice echoed through the loudspeaker, brittle with panic. "Attention, staff. We are conducting a code yellow. Please keep all students in classrooms until further notice." For most kids, those words meant little. They shuffled back into their classrooms, confused, whispering excitedly about something finally breaking the monotony of math tests and spelling drills. But for parents and teachers, the announcement churned up a hollow dread. A 6-year-old child was missing. Daniel Harris felt the weight of it pressing down on his chest as he crouched next to Shadow in the narrow maintenance hallway. The German Shepherd was still glued to the base of the wall, nose twitching, body rigid. He wouldn't back down, not even when Daniel tugged lightly at the leash.
The principal, a tall woman in her 50s with clipped gray hair, came striding down the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. "Officer Harris," she snapped, her voice wavering with nerves. "We've checked everywhere. Every classroom. Every restroom. We even went through the library stacks. She's not here." Daniel straightened. "Then she's still inside this building. She didn't just vanish into thin air." The principal folded her arms, defensive. "And you think she walked straight into walls?" Shadow barked then, one sharp, commanding sound that made both adults flinch. He pawed harder at the baseboard, nose jammed against a faint seam that most eyes would miss. Daniel kept his voice calm. "I don't think she walked in. I think someone put her there." The principal blinked at him, incredulous. "That's impossible. These walls have been here since the 70s. They're solid." Daniel tapped his knuckles against the plaster again. The hollow echo bounced down the corridor. He didn't say anything, just let the sound hang in the air. Shadow growled low, teeth flashing. By the time backup arrived, the mood in the school had shifted from anxious to frantic. Parents had started gathering outside the locked doors, their muffled voices carrying through the glass. Some pressed their palms against the windows, demanding answers. 2 uniformed officers from the local precinct hurried down the maintenance hallway, carrying flashlights and crowbars. One of them, Officer Ruiz, gave Daniel a skeptical look. "So your dog thinks there's a kid inside the wall?" Daniel met his eyes steadily. "Shadow's nose hasn't been wrong in the 5 years I've worked with him." Ruiz smirked faintly. "Well, I guess drywall's easier to bust than chasing perps." He wedged his crowbar into the seam and pulled. The plaster cracked with a sharp pop. Dust rained down. The hollow sound grew louder. And then, with a groan, a section of the wall gave way, revealing darkness behind it. The beam of Ruiz's flashlight cut into the space. It wasn't wide, maybe 2 feet at most, but it ran deep like some forgotten crawl space. Cobwebs clung to the beams. The air smelled stale metallic. And lying there in the dust was a child-sized backpack, pink, with unicorn stickers peeling at the edges. The cafeteria worker's voice trembled. "That's Emily's." A collective chill spread through the group. Shadow lunged forward, but Daniel held him back. "Easy, boy. We'll go together." They cleared debris, widening the gap enough for a person to crawl inside. The space was claustrophobic, barely high enough to crouch. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping occasionally. It didn't look like part of the school blueprints Daniel had ever seen. Shadow led the way, nose to the ground, growling softly. His nails clicked against the concrete floor as he padded deeper into crawlspace. Daniel followed, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. A few yards in, Shadow stopped abruptly, nose pressed against the ground. He barked once, sharp and urgent. Daniel bent down and saw it. Faint shoe prints in the dust. Small ones. "Emily's been through here," he whispered. The crawl space twisted left, then dipped slightly downhill. It led them beneath the old wing of the building, past rusted ducts and forgotten wiring. Every step carried them farther from the familiar hum of classrooms above. Then Shadow froze again. His ears perked, body trembling with tension. Daniel held his breath. For a second, he thought he heard it too, the faintest sound like a muffled sob. "Emily," he called softly. No answer, just silence. Back in the main hallway, the principal argued with the officers. "This is insane. These crawl spaces aren't even on our blueprints. You're scaring the staff and the children." Officer Ruiz cut her off. "A little girl's missing. Your blueprints are the least of my concerns." The principal's cheeks flushed. She muttered something about liability and lawsuits, but her voice shook. Parents outside were banging harder now, voices rising. Someone shouted Emily's name. Another yelled about calling the press. Inside, the officers tried to maintain order, but every second stretched tighter, the panic growing. Daniel and Shadow emerged from the crawlspace covered in dust. He carried Emily's backpack in his hand. Teachers gasped when they saw it, covering their mouths. "Where is she?" the principal demanded. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not here, but she was." He held up the backpack like evidence in court. Shadow barked again, pacing circles, still restless. His nose lifted toward the maintenance hallway that stretched farther toward the boiler room. Daniel clipped the leash tighter. "He's not done. Let's move." The boiler room was sweltering, the air thick with heat and the scent of rust. Massive pipes lined the walls, hissing faintly. Shadow led them to a corner piled with cardboard boxes. He sniffed furiously, pawing at the concrete floor. "Another spot?" Ruiz muttered, exasperated. Daniel crouched. The floor had faint scratches, almost like something heavy had been dragged across it. He ran his hand along the concrete until he found it, a hairline crack in the shape of a square, a trapdoor. Shadow barked, tail rigid, fur bristling. Ruiz's crowbar worked again, and the square lifted, groaning as dust poured upward. Beneath lay a narrow stairwell plunging into darkness. The temperature dropped instantly. The smell was stronger now, damp earth, mold, something acrid. Daniel's stomach clenched. This isn't just a crawl space. It's a tunnel. They descended cautiously, Shadow in the lead. The flashlight beams barely cut through the blackness. The tunnel stretched forward, supported by old timber beams, the kind you'd expect in a mining shaft, not beneath a school. Shadow sniffed the ground, nose twitching rapidly. He barked once, then took off, dragging Daniel down the tunnel. The sound of his claws echoed off the walls. After what felt like forever, they reached a wider chamber. The flashlight beam swung across piles of tools, rope, duct tape, a lantern still glowing faintly. And against the far wall, scrawled in spray paint, were strange markings, jagged lines, shapes that didn't quite make sense. The cafeteria worker gasped. "What the hell is this place?" Daniel's voice was grim. "Not part of any school I've seen." Shadow whined suddenly, nose pressing against a small scrap of fabric caught on a nail. Pink cotton. Emily's shirt. The chamber was empty, but the evidence screamed otherwise. Emily had been there. Someone had taken her. And whoever it was knew this tunnel existed long before today. Ruiz cursed under his breath. This wasn't random. Daniel nodded slowly, heart pounding. He looked at Shadow, who stood tall, ears pricked, eyes burning with focus. "This is bigger than one missing kid," he said quietly. "Someone built this. Someone planned this." The tunnel stretched deeper, disappearing into blackness. Shadow growled, ready to push forward. And Daniel realized the dog wouldn't stop until he led them to the truth. The tunnel stretched farther than anyone wanted to admit. Daniel's flashlight beam caught only dust and darkness, swallowing sound in a way that made every footstep echo louder. It didn't feel like a school anymore. It felt like a place that wasn't supposed to exist, a hidden underbelly carved beneath the foundations of something meant to be safe. Shadow padded ahead, nose twitching, tail stiff. His nails clicked against the old boards, echoing like a metronome in the silence. He stopped every few feet, sniffing at the ground, then surging forward with renewed urgency. Daniel gripped the leash tightly, sweat rolling down the back of his neck, despite the chill in the air. Every instinct in him screamed to move faster, but training told him to stay steady. Panic got people killed. Behind him, Officer Ruiz muttered, "Jesus Harris. This isn't a tunnel. This is a damn maze." Daniel didn't answer. His focus was locked on Shadow. They reached another junction, a split in the tunnel. The left side seemed to curve upward, toward the school's old wing. The right side sloped down deeper into the earth. Shadow didn't hesitate. He yanked hard to the right, barking once, sharp and commanding. Ruiz swore under his breath. "You're really letting the dog pick which way we go." Daniel shot him a look. He's not just a dog. He's trained for this. Trust him. Shadow pulled again, claws scraping. The answer was clear. "All right," Daniel said. We follow Shadow. The deeper they went, the colder it grew. Their breath fogged in the beams of their flashlights. Old wooden beams lined the walls, splintered and damp, some reinforced with rusting metal brackets. "Looks like Prohibition tunnels," Ruiz muttered, brushing his hand against the wall. "Bootleggers used to dig these under small towns. Maybe this one never got filled in." Daniel shook his head. Bootleggers don't leave children's backpacks behind. They pressed forward, Shadow's body vibrating with intensity. Then, suddenly, he stopped. His ears pricked, head cocked. A low growl built in his chest. Daniel froze, straining his ears. At first, there was only silence. Then faint. So faint, he almost doubted himself. A muffled sound. A whimper. Shadow barked explosively, lunging toward the noise. Daniel's heart slammed into his ribs. "Emily," he called out. His voice cracked against the damp stone walls. "Emily, it's Officer Harris. Can you hear me?" The sound cut off. Silence again. They hurried forward until the tunnel narrowed to a wooden door. It looked ancient, patched with iron brackets. Shadow lunged at it, barking, teeth gnashing at the gap at the bottom. Ruiz lifted his crowbar, wedging it against the hinges. "Step back." The wood groaned, then cracked. Splinters flew as the officers forced it open. Inside was a small chamber, lit only by a single bare bulb hanging from a frayed cord. The air smelled damp, moldy. Against the far wall sat a chair, metal, rusted, with ropes dangling from the arms. A coil of duct tape sat nearby, next to an old toolbox. But the chair was empty. "Son of a," Ruiz muttered, backing away. Shadow sniffed furiously, circling the chair, then darting toward the far wall. He whined, pawing at the bricks. Daniel's chest tightened. Emily had been here. He could feel it, but she wasn't anymore. Back at the school above, the chaos was spreading. Parents were shouting in the parking lot, demanding their children be released. The principal stood at the doors, pale and sweating, insisting the kids were safe inside. Teachers whispered, eyes darting toward the police cars now crowding the street. Rumors spread fast in small towns, and within an hour, news vans pulled up. Camera crews pointed lenses toward the building, amplifying the fear already crackling through the community. Inside, Daniel wiped sweat and dirt from his forehead. He crouched beside Shadow, scratching behind his ear. The dog's chest heaved with heavy breaths, but his eyes never left the wall. "You're telling me she was tied to this thing," Ruiz said, gesturing at the chair. "Then somebody moved her through these tunnels, and nobody saw a damn thing." Daniel stared at the ropes, frayed but warm, like they'd been handled minutes ago. His gut clenched. "She's still alive," he said firmly. Shadow wouldn't be this locked in if she wasn't. They pressed forward, deeper into the second tunnel. This one felt different. Tighter, more purposeful. A thin line of footprints dotted the dirt floor. Some small, some larger. Daniel crouched to examine them. Emily's prints. And someone else's. Adult-sized. Ruiz swore again. So we're chasing a kidnapper through a rat hole with nothing but your dog leading the way? Daniel's eyes narrowed. That's exactly what we're doing. Shadow barked sharply, as if to punctuate the point, and surged ahead. The tunnel eventually spilled into another chamber, larger than the last. This one looked like an old storage space. Shelves lined with dusty cans, broken furniture, rusted paint buckets. But on one of the shelves sat something new. A thermos, bright red. Clean. Daniel picked it up, unscrewing the cap. The inside was still warm. Coffee. They're close, he whispered. Shadow sniffed the shelf, growling again. He darted toward the back corner, where another door stood slightly ajar. Daniel's heart hammered. He pushed it open slowly, gun raised, flashlight cutting through the darkness. But there was no person waiting. Instead, they found a narrow ladder climbing up toward a trapdoor. They climbed carefully, Shadow pacing below, until Daniel called him up. The trapdoor opened into most unlikely of places. The school's old art room, boarded up years ago due to asbestos concerns. Dust coated every surface, but the boards on the windows had been pried loose. Shadow barked frantically, nose pressed against the sill. Daniel rushed to the window and shoved it open. Outside on the overgrown lawn, he spotted it, a small pink sneaker lying in the grass. Emily's. Daniel grabbed his radio. We got movement outside the east wing. Kidnappers heading toward the tree line. Shadow leapt through the window without hesitation, landing gracefully on the ground below. He barked, nose glued to the sneaker, then darted forward toward the woods. Daniel followed, crashing through the brush, his heart pounding like a war drum. The woods behind Willow Creek Elementary were dense, the kind of place kids told ghost stories about during campouts. Branches clawed at Daniel's uniform as he ran. Shadow moved like lightning, weaving through underbrush, his barks guiding the officers behind. Somewhere ahead, faint and fleeting, Daniel thought he heard it, a child's cry, muffled but real. "Emily!" he shouted, his voice tearing through the night. For a split second, he swore he saw movement. A figure darted between the trees, carrying something small. Shadow growled, muscles rippling, and surged forward with unstoppable force. The chase had begun, and Daniel knew, deep down, that Shadow wouldn't stop until Emily was found, no matter who stood in their way. The woods swallowed sound in that way country places often did, as if trees conspired to muffle everything but the crunch of your own boots and the pounding in your ears. Daniel Harris crashed through the underbrush, branches clawing his arms, but Shadow was already yards ahead, tearing through the brush with single-minded precision. His bark echoed like a hunting horn. "Slow down, Harris." Officer Ruiz shouted somewhere behind him, but Daniel barely heard. He was locked in, eyes fixed on Shadow's black and tan coat, weaving through the trees. The beam of his flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of pink fabric snagged on branches, a muddy footprint pressed deep into the soil. Each clue was like gasoline on the fire roaring in Daniel's chest. Emily had come this way. She was close. Shadow stopped suddenly, nose pressed into the dirt. He whined, then barked sharply, tail stiff. Daniel dropped to one knee beside him, shining his light. A handprint, small, pressed into the mud, as if someone had stumbled. Daniel swallowed hard. "She's alive," he whispered. The pursuit dragged them deeper into the woods. The school was far behind now, its lights nothing more than a faint glow through the trees. The night air had turned colder, damp with the smell of earth and pine. Every sound felt amplified. Snapping twigs, the rush of breath, the relentless beat of footsteps. But then came something new. Voices. Low. Urgent. Shadow froze, ears pricked. His body went rigid, pointing like an arrow toward the sound. Daniel crouched, holding his breath. Ruiz caught up, panting, and gestured to cut the lights. Darkness swallowed them whole. They listened. "Hurry, we don't have much time." The words drifted through the trees, carried on the wind. A man's voice. Deep. Daniel's pulse hammered. He lowered himself, signaling Shadow with a flat palm. The dog crouched low, silent now but trembling with tension. The voices faded, footsteps moving farther east. When the sound was gone, Daniel exhaled slowly. Ruiz swore under his breath. So it's not just some random psycho. There are two of them. Daniel's jaw clenched. That was the piece he hadn't wanted to admit. They pushed forward, following Shadow's nose. The dog moved more cautiously now, stopping to sniff, checking the ground, weaving a path through the undergrowth. Every so often he'd pause, ears swiveling, then keep moving with that quiet determination only a K9 could have. The trail led to a clearing. At the center stood a shed, small, weather-worn, half collapsed. Its roof sagged, boards rotting, but a faint light flickered inside. Shadow growled low. The sound was guttural, primal. Daniel signaled Ruiz to circle wide. He approached the front slowly, heart pounding, gun drawn. Shadow pressed against his leg, muscles quivering. Daniel pushed the door with his boot. It groaned open. The shed was empty. At least empty of people. Inside, they found ropes, duct tape, and a pile of children's clothes shoved in the corner. Some looked fresh. Some didn't. Ruiz's face drained of color. Dear God! Shadow barked suddenly, spinning toward the far wall. His claws raked at the boards. Daniel shoved a crate aside, revealing a hatch partially hidden beneath the dirt floor. Another tunnel. Above ground, the panic was spreading. By now, parents were screaming at officers outside the school. Some demanded their kids be released. Others demanded to be let in. Reporters shoved microphones toward anyone willing to talk. The words kidnapper, tunnels, and police cover-up already spreading like wildfire. Inside the command post hastily set up in the gym, radios squawked with overlapping voices. Officers tried to coordinate searches, but confusion reigned. And at the center of it all, the principal sat pale and trembling, her voice breaking as she repeated, I had no idea. The walls of her school had tunnels she never knew existed, and now a child was missing inside them. Back in the woods, Daniel knelt beside Shadow. The German shepherd's entire body leaned toward the hatch, growls vibrating in his chest. He pawed frantically at the dirt, desperate to break through. Ruiz shook his head. No way. That thing could collapse on us. Daniel met his eyes. Steady. Emily's in there. You know it. I know it. And he damn well knows it. Ruiz swore, pacing. This isn't procedure. We need backup. Ground-penetrating radar. A whole team. Daniel's voice was low, hard. By the time we wait for backup, she'll be gone. We go now. Shadow barked as if to agree, tail rigid. Ruiz cursed again, but helped clear the dirt. Together they hauled the hatch open. The air that rushed out was cold in the woods, damp and foul. Daniel clicked his flashlight back on. Shadow search. The dog plunged into the darkness without hesitation. The tunnel beneath the shed was narrower, rougher, dirt walls pressed close, boards barely holding the ceiling up. It felt more like a burrow than a passage. Shadow crawled low, his body tense but sure. He stopped suddenly, nose pressed against a patch of dirt. He whined, scratching softly. Daniel leaned closer. Buried half in the soil was a toy, a plastic pony with tangled hair, its side scuffed. Emily's. Daniel pocketed it, throat tight. We're on the right track. They kept moving. The tunnel twisted, dipped, then opened into a larger cavern. Flashlight beams swept across the space and caught something that made Ruiz gag. Cages. Old, rusted, stacked against the wall. Animal cages. The kind used for dogs or maybe livestock. But these weren't empty. Scraps of fabric. Tiny shoes. A tattered backpack lay inside. Ruiz backed up, voice breaking. This isn't just about Emily. Shadow barked violently, his hackles raised. He spun toward the far corner, barking with such ferocity Daniel thought his throat might tear. There, scrawled on the wall in red spray paint, was a single word. Next. The cavern was empty of people, but the evidence was overwhelming. Whoever had taken Emily wasn't working alone, and they'd done this before. Daniel's grip tightened on his flashlight until his knuckles turned white. He looked down at Shadow, who stood rigid, teeth bared, chest heaving with growls. The dog's entire body screamed urgency. "She's close," Daniel murmured. "She has to be." Shadow whined, then surged toward a passage branching off the cavern. Daniel followed, Ruiz trailing reluctantly behind. This passage felt different, narrower, steeper. Roots jutted from the walls. The smell was worse here, sharp and acrid, like chemicals. Shadow barked again, pawing frantically at a spot ahead. Daniel swung his flashlight. Fresh footprints. Mud tracked across the dirt floor. One small, one large. Emily and her captor. The passage ended at a ladder leading upward. Faint light trickled down from above. Shadow whined, staring up, his body vibrating. Daniel tilted his flashlight. The ladder led to another trapdoor, this one newer, the wood clean. He pushed it carefully. It groaned, then gave way. They emerged into an abandoned house on the edge of town. Windows boarded, dust thick. But on the kitchen table sat 2 paper plates, food half-eaten. "Damn it," Ruiz muttered. "We just missed them." Shadow barked, nose darting toward the door. Daniel rushed to the window, scanning the yard. Across the street, headlights flared. A van sped away into the night. Daniel's heart lurched. Emily was inside. "Shadow," he barked. The German shepherd lunged forward, paws slamming against the door, barking so hard it rattled the walls. The chase wasn't over. It was only beginning. The van's taillights cut through the night like twin embers, bouncing across potholes as it tore down the back road. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs as he sprinted out of the abandoned house, Shadow bounding at his side, barking furiously. "Dispatch, this is Harris." Daniel shouted into his radio, breath ragged. Suspect vehicle fleeing eastbound from Maple Street. White panel van, no plates visible. Possible child inside. The radio crackled back with static and hurried voices. "Units en route. Hold position until backup." "Negative." Daniel cut in, his eyes locked on the disappearing glow of the van. "They have Emily. We don't hold. We run." Shadow surged ahead, paws slapping the asphalt, nose stretched forward like a compass needle. Daniel yanked open the squad car door, and the German shepherd leapt in without hesitation, claws scraping the seat. Daniel threw the car into gear, tires squealing as he shot after the van. The chase ripped through the sleepy town, sirens splitting the night. Porch lights flicked on as neighbors stumbled to their windows, watching red and blue lights scream past. Dogs barked from yards. Car alarms wailed as a van careened too close to parked vehicles. Daniel's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, every nerve taut. He kept one hand braced against Shadow, who balanced on the passenger seat, teeth bared, barking at the van as though his voice alone might stop it. "Hang on, girl," Daniel muttered under his breath, picturing Emily's small face, her pink sneakers. "We're coming." The van veered sharply onto an old service road, leading toward the industrial outskirts. It was rougher terrain, cracked asphalt giving way to dirt, weeds clawing at the edges. Daniel gunned the engine, his squad car fishtailing slightly as he followed. But then the road split. Left led deeper into the industrial park, right toward the highway. For a split second, Daniel lost sight of the van in the dark. "Damn it!" he hissed, slamming the wheel. His headlights caught nothing but dust. And that's when Shadow pressed his nose hard against the passenger window, whining sharply. He pawed at the glass, then barked 3 times, urgent, pointing toward the right fork. Daniel didn't question it. He yanked the wheel right, tires spitting gravel. Seconds later, the faint glow of taillights reappeared ahead. Daniel exhaled, a fierce rush of gratitude. "Good boy, Shadow. You've got her scent." They barreled onto the highway, wind whipping against the car, engine screaming in the night. The van weaved recklessly, swerving across lanes, forcing other drivers to slam their brakes. Horns blared. "Dispatch! Suspect now eastbound on Highway 14. Speeds over 70. Advise State Patrol." "Copy, Harris." Troopers notified. Roadblocks setting up. But Daniel knew the kidnapper wouldn't drive into a blockade willingly. Whoever was behind the wheel had planned too much already, tunnels, hideouts, traps. They weren't about to surrender now. Shadow growled low, eyes fixed on the van like a predator tracking prey. His whole body vibrated with focus. Daniel pressed harder on the accelerator. They roared past gas stations and darkened diners, neon signs flickering like ghosts. The highway curved, then dipped into a wooded stretch. For a moment, the van's lights disappeared behind the bend. When Daniel rounded its icons later, his stomach dropped. The van was gone. He slowed slightly, scanning the shoulders, the exits. Nothing but shadows. Where the hell? Shadow barked explosively, nose slamming against the dashboard. He whined, then barked again, staring out the side window toward a gravel pull-off barely visible in the dark. Daniel swerved hard, headlights cutting across the ditch. There, faint tire tracks in the dirt, leading into a narrow logging road. Daniel grinned grimly, not losing them tonight. The squad car bounced violently along the rutted road, branches whipping against the windshield. Ahead, the van's lights flickered between the trees, weaving deeper into the forest. It was a dangerous path, too tight, too unpredictable. But Shadow barked furiously, his body practically lunging against the dashboard. Daniel gritted his teeth, pushing forward. Hold on, boy. We're not stopping now. The chase twisted through the woods, headlights carving tunnels of light through the dark. The van fishtailed wildly, nearly clipping a tree. Daniel matched it, every nerve on edge. Then suddenly, the van swerved hard left, barreling down a slope. Daniel followed, and too late realized it was a dead end. The van skidded to a halt in a clearing, hemmed in by rocks and trees. Its engine roared, tires spinning uselessly in the mud. Shadow's bark thundered inside the car. This is it, Daniel muttered. He threw the squad car into park and jumped out, gun raised. The van's back doors flew open. A figure leapt out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hoodie. He bolted toward the tree lean, leaving the back doors gaping. Daniel's instinct screamed to chase, but Shadow made the choice for him. The German shepherd lunged straight for the van, claws tearing the dirt, barking so fiercely the sound rattled the trees. Daniel sprinted after, swinging the back doors wide. Inside, the air smelled of sweat and gasoline. A blanket was crumpled in the corner, ropes tossed aside. And there, in the dim light, was Emily. She was curled against the wall, duct tape half peeled from her wrists. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, but her eyes lit up the moment she saw Shadow. "Doggy!" she sobbed, her voice cracking with relief. Shadow climbed inside instantly, pressing his body against her, licking her face gently. His tail thumped once, twice, then stood rigid again as he turned back toward the trees, growling low. Daniel's chest tightened. She was alive. She was safe. For now. But the man who took her was still running. Ruiz arrived seconds later, breathless, gun drawn. "We've got her." Daniel nodded sharply. "Call it in. Get an ambulance." She's shaken but breathing. Emily clung to Shadow, her tiny hands gripping his fur like a lifeline. The dog stood guard, eyes never leaving the tree lean. Daniel's gaze followed. The kidnapper was gone, swallowed by the forest. But Shadow's ears were perked, nose twitching, body vibrating. He knew the hunt wasn't over. Back at the clearing, sirens close in. Patrol cars box a van, lights flashing against the trees. Paramedics rush forward, wrapping Emily in a blanket, checking her vitals. She refused to let go of Shadow, her face buried against his neck. Reporters, somehow already on scene, shouted questions from behind the tape. Parents sobbed in relief as news spread that Emily had been found alive. But Daniel couldn't shake the gnawing unease. Inside the van, beneath the blanket, officers found more than rope. A folder, papers, maps, dozens of photos clipped together. Children's faces, names scrawled in messy handwriting. Some were crossed out, and at the bottom of the stack, fresh Emily's school photo. Daniel's blood ran cold as he flipped through the pages. This wasn't one crime. It was part of something bigger, darker. He looked down at Shadow, who sat beside Emily, chest rising and falling, eyes locked on the woods as if daring anyone to come back. "You knew," Daniel whispered, his throat tight. "You always know." Shadow whined softly, leaning into Emily, then lifted his head, growling once more at the forest. Daniel straightened, his jaw set. They had saved Emily. But the hunt wasn't over. The folder was proof there were more children in danger. And somewhere out there, the man in the hoodie wasn't running scared. He was running home. The woods felt heavier that night, as though the trees themselves carried the weight of secrets. Patrol cars lined the clearing like a fortress of light, red and blue strobes flashing against the bark. Emily was safe in the arms of paramedics, clinging fiercely to Shadow even as they tried to load her onto the stretcher. The German Shepherd stayed pressed against her side, a living shield that no one dared remove. Daniel Harris stood near the van, staring down at the folder in his hands. Page after page of children's faces, names scribbled beside them, some scratched out, some circled. It was more than evidence. It was a roadmap. "This isn't just about Emily," he said quietly, his throat tight. Officer Ruiz leaned against a bumper, sweat still streaking his face. He let out a humorless laugh. "You think? That folder looks like a shopping list. And she was next on the order." Daniel shut the folder hard, his jaw set. "Then we make sure she's the last." The hunt for the man in the hoodie stretched deep into the night. Officers spread out in grid searches, flashlights cutting through the trees. Drones buzzed overhead, their infrared cameras sweeping the ground. But it wasn't technology that gave them the lead. It was Shadow. The dog whined, tugging Daniel toward the far edge of the clearing, nose pressed low to the ground. His growl built with each step. Daniel tightened his grip on the leash. "You've got him, don't you, boy?" Shadow barked once, sharp as a gunshot. Then he pulled hard, dragging Daniel into the underbrush. Ruiz cursed, stumbling after them. The trail was fresh, broken branches, footprints sunk deep into mud. Shadow moved like lightning, his body tense with purpose. His growl grew louder as the trail thickened. And then they saw him, the man in the hoodie, hunched low, sprinting through the trees. "Police! Stop!" Daniel shouted, his voice booming across the woods. The man didn't stop. He bolted faster, his breath ragged, branches whipping against him. "Shadow, take him." Daniel released the command. The German Shepherd exploded forward, a streak of muscle and teeth, tearing across the ground with terrifying speed. The man barely had time to glance back before Shadow leapt, jaws clamping onto his arm. He screamed, collapsing into the dirt. Shadow held him pinned, growling low, teeth bared inches from the man's throat. Daniel rushed forward, gun trained, hands where I can see them. Ruiz slapped cuffs onto the man's wrists as Shadow released just enough pressure to keep him still. The man whimpered, clutching his arm. His hood fell back, revealing a gaunt face, eyes hollow and dark. "You don't understand," he rasped. "This doesn't end with me." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Then who does it end with?" The man's cracked lips curled into a faint, chilling smile. "With the ones who built those tunnels. I'm just a runner." Shadow growled, pressing his way harder. By dawn, Emily was safe in a hospital bed, wrapped in blankets, her parents sobbing at her side. She wouldn't let go of Shadow, her tiny hand still gripping his collar even as nurses checked her vitals. The dog lay on the floor beside her, head resting on his paws, amber eyes watching every movement in the room. The town of Willow Creek woke to a new reality. News stations camped outside the hospital, headlines screaming about hidden tunnels, kidnappings, and a K-9 who had saved a little girl. Parents held their children tighter. Teachers cried openly in the hallways. The school, once a symbol of safety, now felt like a crime scene. Daniel sat in the hospital waiting room, exhaustion settling into his bones. Ruiz dropped into the chair beside him, tossing a can of vending machine coffee into his lap. "You look like hell," Ruiz muttered. Daniel cracked a tired smile. "Feel worse." He took a sip, grimacing at the bitterness. Ruiz leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "So what happens now?" Daniel glanced through the window into Emily's room. Shadow lifted his head, meeting his gaze, ears pricked. The dog didn't need words to answer. "We keep going," Daniel said quietly, Because if that folder's right, Emily wasn't the first. And she won't be the last unless we finish this. The following week, the school board announced Willow Creek Elementary would close temporarily. Parents demanded answers, officials promised investigations, and rumors swirled about who could have known about the tunnels. Through it all, one truth rang clear. Without Shadow, Emily would have been another name in the folder. Daniel watched as the little girl's parents brought flowers and toys to the police station, tears streaming down their faces as they hugged Shadow's neck. Emily giggled for the first time since the ordeal, her tiny arms wrapped around the dog's head. "You saved me," she whispered into his fur. "You're my hero." Shadow wagged his tail gently, leaning into her embrace. Daniel swallowed hard. Emotion thick in his throat. He had seen plenty of officers honored with medals and parades, but nothing compared to the look in Emily's eyes as she clung to the dog who had refused to give up on her. Later that night, Daniel sat alone at his kitchen table, the folder spread out before him. Shadow lay at his feet, finally asleep, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Daniel traced the names with his finger, each one a child who needed saving, each one a reason to keep going. The fight wasn't over. But tonight, one little girl was safe, because a dog had growled at a poster, and a man had chosen to listen. The story of Willow Creek would echo far beyond that small town. Parents would share at dinner tables, news anchors would tell it between commercials, and strangers would whisper it as a cautionary tale. But for Daniel, it was simpler than all that. It was about a little girl, a set of tunnels, and a dog who refused to let silence hide the truth. Sparkles, thank you for following this story. Shadow's journey reminds us that sometimes the heroes we need don't wear uniforms. They walk on four legs, guided by instincts sharper than our own. Now I want to ask you, if you were in Daniel's shoes, would you have trusted the dog's instincts from the very start, even when no one else believed?